Okay, we're Mishnah Sanhedrin, Perik Daled, Mishnah Aleph. We're starting the fourth Perik of Sanhedrin. Like in the like in the previous Perik, this Perik also describes the workings of a Bezdin, of a court. And so the first Mishnah opens with a rule about examining witnesses, how we proceed with the Drisha v'Chakira. Says the Mishnah, Echadin Mamonos ve'echadin nefoshes b'Drisha v'Chakira. In both monetary cases as well as in capital cases, the Eidim are subject to Drisha v'Chakira, to investigation and questioning. Shenemar, because the Pasuk says in Vayikra Perek Chav Daled, Mishpat echad yeh lachem. There shall be one law for you, Mishpat echad. That is, there is one law for both monetary as well as capital cases. Now, since we know that Eidim absolutely require, Drisha v'Chakira, investigation and questioning, in capital cases, in Din Nefoshes, so we derive from the pasuk of Mishpat Echad Yeh Lachem, we derive from this pasuk that they require Drisha v'Chakira in monetary cases as well. The Torah says that judges, that the Dayanim must subject the witnesses to Drisha v'Chakira. Now, what does Drisha v'Chakira mean? It means these are questions that relate to the case itself. Drisha are questions that relate directly to the case at hand. For example, in a dispute that involves a loan, so the Dayanim ask, how much money was lent? When was it lent? Where was it lent? What conditions were attached to the loan, if any? But the Torah also requires that there shall be other questions, which we call bedikois. Bedikois. And these bedikois, these test questions, concern not the direct details that we just mentioned, but side details. For example, what color were the clothes that were worn by the lender or by the borrower? Were they standing? Were they sitting? And the like. The Rav explains this. So the Mishnah begins by telling us that both Dini Mamonos and Dini Nefoshes are subject to Drisha v'Chakira. Now comes the Mishnah and lists 10 ways in which capital sins and monetary sins are different. Different in the way the Bezdin conducts its cases. As to the Mishnah, what are the differences between monetary cases and capital cases? Says the Mishnah, Dini Mamonos b'Shloisha. Monetary cases are tried by 3 Dayanim. But Dini Nefoshes b'Esel b'Shloisha. But capital cases are tried by a Bezdin of 23. We learned this in Mishnah Aleph, in Perek Aleph. We also learned it in Mishnah Daled of Perek Aleph. Yes, so the first difference is the number of Dayanim in the Bezdin. Dini Mamonos b'Shloisha, Dini Nefoshes b'Esel b'Shloisha. Number 2, Dini Mamonos poitzchin ben l'schus ben l'choiva. When the Dayanim hear the basic facts of the case and they begin their deliberation, so the Dayanim may begin their deliberation, their discussion of monetary cases either with an argument to benefit the defendant or with an argument to his harm. To his benefit is l'schus, to his harm is l'choiva. But by din and nefoshes, but in the case of a capital crime, din and nefoshes, poischem l'schus, ve'im poischem l'choiva. In din and nefoshes, we may only begin with statements, with arguments, with analysis to his favor, to the benefit of the defendant. And we do not begin with anything to his harm. Ein poischim lechoiva. At the beginning of a capital case, the judges tell the defendant, if you did not commit the crime that you are accused of, you do not need to be afraid. That's what we're taught that in the Gemara. Number 3, dinin momenis matin al pi echad, pen l'schus, ben l'choiva. Dinin momenis monetary cases, we decide with a majority of just one vote, whether it's to the benefit of the defendant or to his harm. So, for example, if 2 judges rule that the defendant is obligated to pay, and one rules that he's exempt, he must pay. He must pay. Because dinim momenis matin al pi echad. But dinim nefoshes matin al pi echad l'schus ve'al pi shnayim l'choiva. But in capital cases, we decide capital cases with a majority of just one vote to the benefit of the defendant, and only with a majority of at least 2 to his harm, l'choiva. Meaning that a majority of 1 is enough to acquit the defendant, but a majority of 2 is required to convict him. As we learned in Mishnah Vav. Therefore, if 12 of the 23 dayanim find him guilty, and the other 11 find him innocent, since there is a majority of only 1, he cannot be convicted. And then more judges are added to the court until they reach either a majority of 2 for conviction or a majority of 1 for acquittal, which the Mishnah describes in Perek Hey, Mishnah Hey. Okay, so dini momenis matin al pi echad ben l'schus ben l'choiva, but dini nefoshes matin al pi echad l'schus ve'al pi shnayim l'choiva. Number 4, dini momenis machzirin ben l'schus ben l'choiva. In regard to monetary cases, to dini momenis, we can reverse a verdict in monetary cases, whether the reversal is to the benefit of the defendant or to his harm. Even after 2 judges, even after the judges have decided the case one way or the other, if they realize that they missed out on a certain point, if they realize that they didn't analyze something fully, if they realize that they went in the wrong direction because of a certain given point that was made, and they now feel differently, they have the right to reverse the verdict. They have a right to reverse the verdict in dinim momenis, whether l'schus to his favor or l'choiva to his harm. Unlike dinim nefoshes machzirin l'schus ve'in machzirin l'choiva. But we reverse a verdict in capital cases only if the reversal is to his benefit, not to his harm. That is to say, that if the defendant was convicted and then the dayanim discovered that the verdict was mistaken for whatever reason, they must reverse the verdict and acquit him. But if the verdict of acquittal is found to be mistaken, it remains so in force, unless it contradicts mifurash, a halacha, a law explicitly written in the Torah. Number 5. Dini mamonis hakol melamdim schus v'choiva. In monetary cases, anyone, whether one of the Dayanim or one of the Talmidim, one of the disciples, who also sit in the Bezdin to learn, to understand, to appreciate the nuances of Psak Halacha and of Dinim and so forth. So in Dinim Omenes, anyone could issue an opinion in regard to finding him either guilty or to acquit him. Hakol melamdim schus v'choiva. Anyone, whether one of the Dayanim or one of the Talmidim, may argue to the benefit of the defendant or to his harm. But dinin nefoshes hakol melamdim schus vein hakol melamdim choiva. But in capital cases, anyone, whether the Dayanim or the disciples, may argue to the benefit of the defendant, but to argue to his harm, to argue that he's guilty, that may only be done by the Dayanim. Schus, dinin nefoshes hakol melamdim schus, vein hakol melamdim choiva. Not everybody. The disciples may not argue to his harm. In a capital case, if one of the students, if one of the disciples says that he has a reason to convict the defendant, the Dayanim do not need to listen to his opinion, to their opinions, unless they are full-fledged Dayanim. Number 6. Dini momenes amelamet choiva melamet schus, v'amelamet schus melamet choiva. In monetary cases, one who has argued to the harm of the defendant may later on, as the discussions continue, as the analysis goes further in, may later argue to his benefit. And one who has argued to his benefit may later argue to his harm in dinim omenes. But dinim nefoshes, however, in regard to capital cases, amelamet choiva melamet schus, one who has argued to the harm of the defendant may later argue to his benefit, but not the reverse. Aval melamet schus ein yochel lachzor melamet choiva. In dinim nefoshes, once you've argued to acquit him, to his benefit, you may not change your mind and argue to his harm. In a capital case, once a dayan has put forward a reason to acquit the defendant, he may no longer argue for conviction. But for the opposite is permitted. Even after a judge has argued for conviction, he may change his mind and argue for acquittal. The Torah says in Bamidbar 35, it says there in regard to capital punishment, in regard to capital cases, vehitzilu ha'eda, vehitzilu, that the eda, that the courts shall save. And this pasuk teaches us the judges trying a capital crime must try in every which way to save the accused from the death penalty. And that is the reason why, if a judge who argued for acquittal, if a judge argued for acquittal, it's forbidden to switch sides and argue for conviction, because he will be motivated to find reasons that support his original opinion. And in doing so, he might find a reason that will convince the other Dayanim to join him in voting for acquittal. Weiter. Number 7. Monetary cases must be discussed in the daytime, but may be concluded at night. But in capital cases, the case must be discussed by day, in daytime, and must be concluded in the daytime as well. We learned this from a pasuk. There's one pasuk states that monetary cases may be judged at any time, which includes the night. But another pasuk specifies the daytime. So the Chachamim solved this contradiction by explaining that the court must hold its discussion in the daytime, but it may vote even at night. It may vote even at night. Dini mamonis goyimrim, but next case, number 8. Dini mamonis goyimrim boy bayoim ben l'schus ben l'choiva. Monetary cases may be concluded on the same day that they were begun, whether the verdict is to the benefit of the defendant or to his harm. Unlike dini nefoshes goyimrim boy bayoim l'schus, but capital cases may be concluded on the same day only if the psak din, only if the verdict is to the benefit of the defendant. Ubayoim shalachav l'choiva, but they have to be concluded on the next day if the verdict is to his harm. And because of that, lefichach ein donin loy be'erev Shabbos v'loy be'erev Yontiv. Therefore, we don't judge capital cases on Friday or on the day before Yontif, on Erev Yontif, because if the defendant is found guilty, we may not sentence him until the next day. The next day is going to be either Shabbos or Yontif, and it is impossible to then carry out the sentence. Let's understand this a little bit better. A guilty verdict must be delayed until the next day so that the Dayanim will have time to find reasons for acquittal. And they reach the decision he's guilty. Well, let's think further. Let them have the overnight to think it through again. Let them sleep on it. Because when a court sentences someone to death, capital crimes, they must execute him al pi halacha the very same day in order to spare him the agony, the emotional distress of waiting to be executed. However, it's also to perform an execution on Shabbos or Yontif. And therefore, capital cases may not be tried on the day before Shabbos or Yontif, because if the Dayanim decide to convict the accused, in which case the verdict will have to be delayed until the next day, they will not be able to execute him on the same day as the verdict. That's the end of Mishnah Aleph. Let's also quickly learn Mishnah Beis, because it's a short Mishnah and it's a continuation of the same inyan. Continuing from the previous Mishnah, this Mishnah lists the 9th and 10th ways in which the capital cases are different than other types of cases. Din, says the Mishnah, Dina yatumus v'ataris maschil min agodol. When we have in front of us, in front of the Bezdin, a case of Tumah v'Taira, as well as other matters of Isu v'Heter, other matters of prohibition, when these cases are brought before the Bezdin, then we begin the deliberations min agodol. They begin with the greatest, with the most prominent, with the most senior of the Dayanim. That means to say that the greatest judge, the Gadol Shebahem, of course, means B'chochma, the biggest Talmid Chacham, the most senior Dayan. We begin the deliberations and the rendering of opinions with the Gadol, with the most senior. He gives his opinion first. Why does he give his opinion first? Because it's disrespectful to speak before a wiser person has spoken. That's what the Tosfos Yontif explains. So when it comes to dinim of tumas for tyrus of isel veheter, we begin with Monsignor. But dinin nefoshes, but when it comes to capital cases, maschilin minatzad. In capital cases, they begin from the side. What does from the side mean? It means from the lesser dayanim, from the more junior dayanim, who sit nearer to the end of the semicircle of judges, something that we'll see in the next Mishnah, the way they sat around in the semicircle. So minatzad means we begin in capital cases from the lesser dayanim who sit nearer to the end of the semicircle of dayanim. The judges of the Sanhedrin sit in a semicircle. The Nasi, the most senior dayan, sits near one end. And the second greatest judge, the second senior, the second in seniority, who is the Av Bezdin, sits to his right. And the other dayanim sit in their order of seniority, in their order of their wisdom, with the wisest of the dayanim sitting closer to the Nasi, and the more junior of the dayanim further away. That's why the Mishnah calls it Dinin Nefoshes Maschilin Minat Tzad. And then the Mishnah says, difference number 10. Akol Ksherim Lodun Dinin Momonis. Everyone is qualified to serve as a dayan where it comes to monetary matters, to non-capital cases. What do you mean everyone? What do you mean everyone? Everyone means even someone who is, for example, the son of a convert. That is to say that he was not born to two Jewish parents. He was converted. Or even a mamzer, someone who is born of a forbidden union, which is punishable by chorus. He's born from a parent who is a mamzer or a mamzeres. So, but he himself is a kosher yid. He can also serve on the Bezdin of Dinim Omenes. But Eina Kol Ksherim Lodun Dinim Foshes. Not everyone is qualified to judge on capital cases. Only Koyanim, Levim, V'Yisraelim Amasim Lekehuna. Only Koyanim, Levim, and Israelim whose lineage is pure enough that they can marry off their daughters to Koyanim. Meaning to say, there are a number of disqualifications that a father can pass down to his daughter that will make her unfit to be married to a Kohen. For example, if he is a Cholol, his daughter is forbidden to be married to a Kohen. Only a man who is free of any and all disqualifications is allowed to serve on a Bezdin of Dinei Nefoshes. This halacha is derived from a pasuk in Shmois Perek Yud Ches, which is interpreted as comparing other judges to Moshe, who was of pure lineage. The Rav says this: "Ve'eina kol ksherim lodon din nefoshes, dichsiv ve'akel mehalecha, lighten your burden, ve'nosu itach, and others shall carry the burden with you," right? Which is the advice that was given to him by Yisroi. So what does it mean, ve'nosu itach? So Rav bedoimin lach, they shall be like you. In what way? How can they be like Moshe? There is nobody like Moshe. Bedoimin lach means ma Moshe Rabbeinu meyuchas, af bezdin meyuchasim. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu was of a pure lineage, he was a meyuchas, so do the members of any bezdin dealing with capital issues, with capital sin, with capital crime. They too need to be meyuchasim. Meyuchasim meaning Koyanim, Levim, Yisraelim, Amasim lekehuna. Okay, we did Aleph and Beis of Perek Daled.